Thank you for the introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation to this very stimulating conference, which I enjoy very much, and I'm looking forward to the next day. Just a short story which came into my mind yesterday, as was said that in many countries the Holocaust is not a chapter in a national or general history. I was thinking about a very recent story from this Sunday, taking a bus to the airport heading to Israel. I met 3 Greek students studying at the University of Sheffield who started a conversation with me, and once I said I am doing research on Jews in Greece, one of the students replied, they were all collaborators of Germans. I was wondering why, and he explained it to me immediately. They were not Greeks, so they were collaborators. As you see, there is a lot of work to be done on research of Jews in Greece and their tragic fate. And because it's not that well known, okay, I will give you just some very brief and basic data about Jews in Greece. You have a map over here with all the pre-war and post-war communities in Greek, which are virtually all around Greece, which in that part, thinking of the Dodecanese of Rhodes and so on, were not Greek at the time of the beginning of Nazi occupation at all. And that's quite important for the interviews and for the structure of them and for identifying the testimonies and visual history archive, which I am speaking about. There was quite a rich community of Romagnot and Sephardic Jews living in Greece, and a small community of Ashkenazim as well. As you see, most of them perished during the Second World War, and most of them because of the Nazi occupation, and they were transported and murdered in Auschwitz-Birkenau. Even if the Romani Jews were nearly all over Greece, there was a very important community, a Sephardic community in Thessaloniki, which was like more than a quarter of the citizens living in, or inhabitants living in Thessaloniki. All of them, as I said, or most of them were Sephards. The same applies for the part which is on a northeast, which was under Bulgarian occupation, because Greece was suffering during the Second World War under triple occupation, first Italy until Mussolini surrendered, Germany and Bulgaria as well. The outcome of the Holocaust was terrible, but it was much worse in a German zone, which started from the beginning of the, or from April 41, and most of the Jews, you see the numbers and the percentage would be like 90 to 95% of Thessaloniki Jews were murdered during the Nazi occupation outside of Greece mostly. The balance of Jews who survived in an Italian zone was much more diverse. So if the Jews were living in Italian zone, they were much more able to survive the war and to return to their homes after the war. Here you have the numbers of survivors, or those who perished during the occupation, according to the free zones and in Greece as such. Well, what I am interested in my ongoing research is the post-war reconstruction of Jewish community in Greece, and in this research, I am focusing, among other sources, archival sources and newspapers, Jewish newspapers mostly, also on oral testimonies. I want to add that my only source isn't just the archive, the visual history archive of the Shoah Foundation, but I can find a lot of testimonies and make use of other testimonies. Yad Vashem, U.S. Holocaust Memorial, Fortunov collection is a very important one, the recent collection of Zintropa, and also a very rich connection of the Jewish Museum in Athens. All of that has been sorted in a very beautiful way and is online available even in English, in Greek and in English, in a database, or maybe more a metadatabase of Greek Jewish Holocaust survivor testimonies, where you can find under different names that what we spoke about with Alexandra, that if the names change, whatever name you put in, as much as they know the name, you will find the person you are looking for, and you will have a list of testimonies and the archives. You can look for them. So it's very useful for the research I am doing. What I'm presenting here today is the collection of testimonies of Jews from Greece in a visual history archive. And my basic questions are drawing on these testimonies from the visual history archive. I want to address a wider range of problems arising not only from different profiles of the narrators and the fact that the individual memories have been shaped for more than 5 decades by many internal and external factors within the family memory as well as the public memory. Most of the interviews were recorded in the late 90s, which are archived and accessible in a visual history archive database, but also from the fact that the semi-structured interviews did not focus in depth on the post-war period, which was an obstacle I had to deal with. In my opinion, a model built on carefully chosen variables resulting from this analysis of about 60 testimonies, as you will hear later on, may serve in the future as a tool for comparative research of post-war memory based on recordings of the Holocaust survivors. As you see, you surely know a lot about the visual history archive collection, so I will want to elaborate more on Greece and on the recordings of Jews from Greece. There are about 700 testimonies. I can't be sure about the numbers because the identity of some of the survivors is dubious. Sometimes they didn't have Greek nationality. Other times they were born in Ottoman Empire. Other times they were born in Rhodes and they never referred to them to themselves as Greek Jews or Jews from Greece. So therefore, I don't have exact numbers, and I was going through several factors, but I didn't find a final number of testimonies which I could introduce to you. About half and half of the recordings were recorded in Greece and abroad. You will see for your own, according to the languages, you can guess. And I would have another chart on the countries as well, but we won't have time for all of this. Most of them were born in Greece. Some of them were born in the Ottoman Empire, so I had to look for the Ottoman Empire. Some of them were born outside of Greece, but living in Greece in an interwar period or in the eve of the Second World War. I could find people from born in France, in Italy, in Germany, Austria, even Czechoslovakia, and of course in the neighboring Balkan countries, especially in Bulgaria and in Yugoslavia, namely in Bitola Monastery and so on, which is today the Republic of Macedonia. And I already mentioned the case of Rhodes, which is totally excluded of that. None of the interviews is in Greek. Most of them are in Italian, some of them in Hebrew, and very few of them in English. The languages of the interviews you can find over here. So you can see that most of the interviews were recorded in Greek, and the first number refers to the interviews which were recorded in Greek in general, in Greece and outside of Greece. The second number are the interviews which were recorded in Greek in Greece. However, it happened that some survivors, about 40 survivors, decided to record the interview in a different language in Greece, which was very interesting, and they mostly claim they did it because they want their story to be accessible to a wider audience. So they decided to say it in English. Unfortunately, it may happen that it's not accessible to the Greeks who don't speak English. So that's the other obstacle in it. Again, that may be the reason which they never express, that they don't want everybody in Greece to be listening to their stories. You see the locations I was speaking about, or I mentioned in a first slide, the communities in Greece. All of those 700 interviews were from different locations, 32 locations all around Greece. These are the places where the people were born in Greece again. You do see that they tried, the division which was doing the interviews tried to cover most of Greece, as it's mentioned here. I would like to elaborate more on a structure of the interviews, which, as I mentioned already, the interviews were semi-structured, they are chronological, linear, and in the guidelines for the interviews, it's suggested by the Visual History Archive that 20% of the interviews are on pre-war period, 60% on a war period, and 20% on a post-war period. You will see that there is much more focus, much less focus on a post-war period, and mostly the narrators are elaborating more on a pre-war and, of course, the war period. There is a very extensive pre-interview questionnaire, about 40 pages, only the template of it. However, the results of it, the filled-in questionnaires are not available to the researchers, which is a huge shame and would be very helpful to us. As regards the interview itself, it's very important to watch the indexing terms. And for the post-war period, you have the basic indexing terms, which are included in most of the interviews listed over here. I won't read through it, but you can see them yourself. The indexing terms suggest that the narrators do not enrich that much our factual knowledge about the post-war reconstruction, which in my opinion was very important, but much more our idea about the changing identities and values, as well as about the emotional recovery of the survivors. So if a researcher expects facts, there won't be that many facts, but the everyday life and especially the changing identity because of the terms, and you see that there are a lot of indexing terms which are more referring to the loved one contacts and marriages and so on. So they are more speaking about what changed from before the war and or the war period to the post-war period. A very important part of the interview or of the structure you can find in a Visual History Archive are the name index as well, because you can trace the interrelations between the survivors, which are who were friends, who were combatants in partisan units, who were interned together, who were brothers and sisters, who were couples or even families, mothers and children. Very important is the periodization as well, because you can see some periods, and you do see that the Greek Civil War is pretty important. even if these interviews are reflecting on the post-war life of Jews in Greece. So it's not a giant distribution committee. It's nothing which is related to the life of Jews and the reconstruction of the community. It's much more the events which were important for the global Greek history, which is the Greek Civil War and the junta. And the thing I found most tricky once I went through the 60 interviews I studied thoroughly were the interviewers. And that was a topic we touched on several times. So for all the 275 interviews which were recorded in Greece, we have in total 25 interviewers only. From these 25 interviewers, you can find some who recorded just 1 or 2 interviews, but you can find several who recorded dozens of interviews, and one interviewer recorded even 67 of those interviews. About the gender thing, which was very striking, and I think it has to do with the late interviewing in the late 90s. We do have a significant number of women who were interviewing, and that's 22 female and only 3 male interviewers in all this Greek collection recorded in Greece and in Greek. There are 2 more interviewers who are recording in Greek, but outside of Greece. And what was also very interesting is that for all Greece we have only 2 local coordinators. One is in Thessaloniki, the former Jerusalem of the Balkans, which doesn't have a significant Jewish community as it had before the war. But the post-war center of Jews in Greece after the war is Athens, and we have another coordinator for Athens. The groups are within each other very interrelated, which means all the interviewers in under the coordinator from Thessaloniki know each other, and all the interviewers from the group from Athens know each other, but they don't know the group from the other city. So this is very interesting. And once we are dealing with the recordings from Thessaloniki, we get only the Sephardic Jews. Once we have the community of Athens, we get much more mixed picture, and the interviewers from Athens are traveling around Greece much more than the interviewers in Thessaloniki. The other thing was that I was looking at who is the interviewer and which is his or her background. I found out that absolute majority, except of 3 people, are people of Jewish background. And a very interesting thing was that 2 of the interviewers were survivors themselves. So survivors recording testimonies of other survivors, very often knowing each other from camps, hidings, and so on. And we do have several researchers as well, of whom quite a lot of them are of, or the majority of the 4 is of Jewish background. The one researcher who is non-Jewish did only 1 interview and is researching on Jews in Greece. Well, only briefly the categorization of the survivors, which I was thinking is important to mention. We of course do have deportees from Greece, we do have refugees, but we also have a huge group of Jewish partisans who were recorded, and we have people in hidings and living under false identity. Because the time is tight, oh no. No, this wasn't a good move. Yes. Just to conclude, and I will read a part of my paper where you can read more about the testimonies. You can have the name of the names of the survivors with the numbers from the Visual History Archive. And I hope that my case study on Greece, which has a lot of quotation, will be published recently. Unfortunately, first in Czech, but I hope very soon it will come in English as well. Concluding, for a research making use of oral testimonies within collection of Holocaust accounts, it is foremost important to keep in mind that the histories have undergone a process of memory formation influenced by many internal and external factors such as self-stylization, self-censorship, and of course forgetting, but also cultural influence of the society they lived in, which has been focused on a Holocaust, especially since 1980s, in different manners and presenting in public space in various ways. The narratives, moreover, enter the interview with certain expectation and imagination, which history the potential audience may expect. It was also mentioned, you don't want to hear anything about the post-war time because after the war it was over. That was what I have to tell you. In this way, the time gap between the actual experience and the interview greatly influenced the narration provided to us. But we also have to take into consideration some other facts. About half a century passed since the end of the war and the time of recording, which means that only those who survived the Holocaust as children in their youth or early productive age were able to testify. The oldest one in the collection was born in 1903, and that was an exception. Most of them were born in 1911 and beyond. The principal goal for them in a post-war years was to educate themselves in order to find an adequate occupation and to re-establish their personal life. Now I'm going more into the identities, especially in terms of creating functioning family. Even if people in their early age proved to be generally more capable to recover from their traumatic experience than elderly people, it can be observed that all of the survivors are carrying their trauma throughout their whole life. In this context, the way they survived the Holocaust seems to play a decisive role. Those of these survivors who did not go through concentration camps, even if they lost a part or most of their closest family, are in general much less deprived in their post-war life than the deportees. However, in a concentration camp survivors, if the concentration camp survivors tend to change their Jewish identity, especially as regards the faith, due to the most traumatic experience they did, the resistance fighter do so due to their worldview, being communist mostly mentioned, which doesn't go together with the religion for them, as they mention again in their narratives. Only modern changes in identity can be observed by the survivors who spent the war in emigration, not escaping or going out of the Bergen-Belsen camp, which would be another long story, and returning from emigration. Some differences can be followed regarding the gender. If men, with some exceptions of course, usually tend to depict their life in a more general, heroic, and sometimes even humorous way, women focus more on a common episodes of everyday life. I'm speaking on about the post-war period, please keep it in mind. Last but not least, we have to be aware of the fact that the interviewers are to a great extent or influence in a great extent the interviews as such. A double identity can be observed among the Jews in a post-war period, but not regarding their identity as Romagnots or Sephards, which is nearly disappearing. As for the post-war period, many survivors refer to themselves as being Greeks or being Greek Jews. We never hear it for the interwar period, only as Jews from Greece or Jews living in Greece, which is largely in contrast to their pre-war identity. While the interviewers identify their ancestors mostly locally as Jews from Thessaloniki, Volos, Athens, Corfu, and so on, or culturally as Sephardim or Romagnots, as for themselves, they claim to be Greek Jews with little distinction of a specific Jewish subculture, Romagnot, Sephardic. Also, the language is nearly Ladino is nearly non-existent, as you saw. We do have, from all that 700 testimonies, we have only 6 testimonies in Ladino, and most of them are exclusively in Ladino. In the end, allow me a few words on a changing identity of the survivors. At the time when the interviews were recorded, with respect to the narrator's life experience, the interviewees became accustomed to declare their Jewishness mostly on individual level, mainly in close family environment or in a community. However, as the recent political development in Greece introduced anti-Semitic rhetoric in a general discourse, we can experience a sort of social mobilization during which the survivors decide to share their histories in public space. That is also reflected in their answers to the last question in the interviews recorded nearly 2 decades ago. While being asked for a future message, most of the survivors state that they decided to share their memory as a historical fact, to pass it on to their families, future generation, and humanity as such, so that their experience never repeats again in any form. Thank you.